With Dragon Quest 1 and 2 HD-2D Remake right around the corner, coming out October 30th, I thought it'd be interesting to delve into the original development of Dragon Quest 2. I was able to dig up an interview with Yuji Horii that was translated in 2021 but conducted back in 1987. Shortly after the release of Dragon Quest II back on the original Famicom. With the ideas, struggles, and development fresh in Yuji Horii's mind, this is something I've been wanting to share with you guys for quite some time. Shoutouts to Shmuplations for translating this interview. You can find the interview in English on shmuplations.com. A lot of the spell names and location names have been translated to what the English ones were back on the original NES to try and avoid confusion. Obviously, this makes a little bit more confusing because a lot of these towns and cities and spells have been renamed in the modern era of Dragon Quest, but it still helps out quite a bit compared to the Japanese names. Now, everyone who's played the original or even a remake of Dragon Quest II understands that it went through some troublesome development because they were trying too much potentially too soon. I always say that Dragon Quest II crawled so Dragon Quest III could soar, but they were definitely learning as they were going along in the development process. So I wanted to look back at an old interview with Yuji Horii talking about the process of developing Dragon Quest II back in the day, all the ideas they had that didn't make the cut, as well as what the difficulties were and how they went about resolving them. If you enjoy Dragon Quest videos, JRPG videos, top 10s, reviews, and podcasts, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn notifications to all. Now let's begin. Alright, so the interview, translated for shmuplations.com, begins by talking about delays and difficulty in balancing. Yuji Horii starts things off by saying, "We started planning Dragon Quest II about 7 months after Dragon Quest was released. It took a little longer than we had planned at first, but by the start of November, we had the main programming mostly completed. However, as you know, Dragon Quest II wasn't released until January 26th of this year. Technically, we were able to release it by the end of last year, so why did it get extended a whole other month? The answer is simple. The programming is done, but when we actually played it, we found it far too difficult. At that point, the game's balance still wasn't right, and fixing it delayed us for a month. To explain the problem more concretely, the balance between your character's strength and the monster's strength wasn't right. Of course, we couldn't just haphazardly modify everything. Instead, Nakamura created a fight simulation program, and we went through each monster one by one, adjusting the player level data and the monster data individually." Now, the Nakamura Yuji Horii is mentioning here is, of course, Koichi Nakamura, the founder and president of Chunsoft, who also acted as the director and chief programmer of Dragon Quest II. Yuji Horii then continued, "But even after those adjustments, when we went back to the game and tried it, the balance was still off. Why? 2 reasons. The first is that we adjusted the monster's strength in the simulator one by one, with an eye for making each individual fight tense and challenging. But when we tried it in the game, consecutive fights made it way too difficult. The second reason is that we had underestimated the difficulty of battles with multiple monsters. As a result, our first pass at Dragon Quest II was a game you could hardly play. You'd die right away. You couldn't even make it to the Prince of Canic. Because of this, we delayed the release for a month and spent that time balancing the game. In the beginning of the game, when the player was still alone with no companions, he would die constantly. To solve this problem, we limited the number of monsters that could appear in a battle on the first continent to only 3. That made it a lot better, but it was still too hard. The problem is that the Prince of Middenhall is a fighter. No matter how much you level him, he'll never learn heal. So he always has to use medical herbs and stay at inns. In other words, the further he travels from town, the harder it gets. To address this, we moved the location of Canic Castle to be closer. Canic Castle was originally located where the Lake Cave is now, but this was way too far from Leftwind Village, the location of the first inn. Now, I'm going to use the gameplay here to show you how far the Kingdom of Canic is in the NES version of Dragon Quest II first. Then afterwards, head over to the Lake Cave, where the developers had originally put Canic, so you can see for yourself just how ridiculously far away this was, while Yuji Horii continues explaining how they fixed this. So we changed the Lake Cave dungeon to a place you'd go to after getting the Prince of Canic, and we moved Canic Castle much closer. By the way, if you look at the back of the jacket of the Dragon Quest II LP record, it shows a castle surrounded by a lake. This was the original location of Canic Castle. They finished the jacket design for the LP fairly early, so it ended up having that original location pictured. Yuji Horii continues, "But this meant that the lake in the far east where Canic Castle had been was now a rather pointless area. We'd spent all that time working on the landscape, so it seemed like a waste. So we put the Lake Cave dungeon where Canic Castle was, rearranged the distribution of monsters on the map, and moved the location of certain items to retain the game balance. It seems to me that's not the only landscape that they ended up altering. It's always looked like the developers put this giant middle finger in the world map on your way to Hamlin or Moonahan to let you know you're about to get your butthole bored out by baboons. We then did further adjustments on the monster data and player levels, as well as the price and strength of weapons and armor. It goes without saying that finding the right balance is key to a good RPG. And to adjust that balance, there's no other way but to actually playtest the game, make some small adjustments, test it again, make more adjustments, and so on. Practically speaking, this meant that all of our staff, as well as many playtesters working part-time, were all playing through the game during this period. Their feedback, as well as their complaints, were then all conveyed directly to me.
I can't make any money. Lower the prices, please. Battles take too long. Can't you make them quicker? Can we adjust the speed at which you level up? The transition from level 4 to level 5 is especially rough. No, I think the leveling is fine as it is now, but I'm still dying too much.
And so on and so forth. I'd listen to their comments and then play it myself, adjusting the data for parts I thought were off. As soon as I finished, I'd send a fax to Chunsoft where Nakamura would swap the old data for my updated data and make a new prototype version from that. Then I'd distribute that back to all the playtesters and the process would begin again. Naturally, game balancing isn't something you get right after one pass. We repeated this process over and over. At first it went in 4 to 5 day increments, and soon after 2 to 3. And then we were getting new updated prototypes daily. At that point, we had to make sure every prototype version was clearly labeled with a date and time. December 8th, 4 AM version. Without that, you'd have no way of knowing what the newest one was. Adjusting the order of spells learned, changing the strength of monsters, lowering the prices at the church. In this way, the month went by in the blink of an eye. We had a time limit after all. I wouldn't say we found the 100% ideal balance, but I think we came 90% of the way. If we had more time, I think we could have made it perfect, but I didn't want to make the children wait any longer. By mid-December, we had finished the final version, but by that moment, I had collapsed from a stomach ulcer. So another problem that they encountered developing Dragon Quest II was, of course, the memory limitations of the Famicom. Yuji Horii, talking about the memory problems, said, "The memory limitations we had with Dragon Quest II caused us no shortage of strife. The first unfortunate victim were the large pictures we planned to use for cutscenes and such. We put them in at first, but as the graphics memory got larger and larger, in the end we had to remove them and abandon the idea. I imagine few people have noticed this, but we stealthily printed one of those images in the story section of the Dragon Quest II instruction manual. Of course, on the Famicom, it would have actually been in color. We also wanted to use a full-size picture for a scenario we had planned involving the sunken treasure. Originally, if you looked out from the top of the lighthouse in the direction of Rhone, you could see a picture of Rhone's landscape, and in the sea just beyond there would be a single sparkling point of light. That was where the sunken treasure was supposed to be. And there was a scenario where you'd talk to people and find out more info about it. But when the picture was too big for the memory, we had to change the scenario. Anyone who's played Dragon Quest II, especially on the NES or the Famicom, knows how much of a nightmare it was to find the sunken treasure. You're literally scouring the ocean for a single tile of the water that looks different than the others. One of the sillier ideas we abandoned was the dangerous swimsuit. This is supposed to be a piece of armor as strong as the mink coat and incredibly expensive. If you bought it for the princess, her character sprite was actually supposed to change and show her wearing it. This swimsuit that Yuji Horii is talking about was actually included in the MSX version of the game in slightly modified form. If you talk to the King of Tantegel when the princess has nothing equipped, he will give her the Abunai Mizugi, or dangerous swimsuit, and a picture will appear on screen of her wearing it. And last but not least, Yuji Horii went on to talk about some alternate endings that they wanted to do for the game. One of these endings is actually quite shocking and would have definitely appeased the "I wish Dragon Quest was a bit darker" crowd. On the topic of alternate endings, Yuji Horii went on to say, "We also wanted to do more for the ending. After you arrive at the throne and are seated as the king, we wanted various people from the game to come one by one and pay their respects. The final scene would have been a glamorous courtroom dance." Another idea we had for the ending was this. In the final battle, the Prince of Canic would sacrifice himself to defeat Hargon. Your quest would be complete, but the Prince of Canic would not return. Wishing him peace in the next life, you and the Princess of Moonbrook would return to Middenhall. The people there would be praising your great exploits, and a grand ceremony would begin, but then, a single girl would rush up to you yelling,
"You killed my brother!"
And you would realize only too late the dagger in her hand as she plunges it deep into your chest. This, of course, was the younger sister of the Prince of Canic. The people are shocked, and life slowly fades from your body. But that ending was far too sad, so in the end we decided against it. And yet, I still really want to make something with that kind of atmosphere if I ever have the chance. I want to make something beautiful and sad, a tearful RPG, though when I'll have that chance, who knows. A game that while you're playing it, tears will well up in your eyes without you even being aware. I think that would make for a good game. Those were the main things we left out due to memory limitations. There were also a number of items we had to remove, so if you find an empty treasure chest, that's why. But perhaps it would be fun if you use your rich imagination and think, what was supposed to be in this chest? By which I mean to say, now that Dragon Quest II is released, it's out of our hands as designers. All we've done is prepare the world. The tales and mysteries you experience there are up to you. I only hope that you'll be left with joyful memories. I just love Yuji Horii so much. The way he says in this interview, look guys, we just created the world. It's up to you to create and have the adventure. And it definitely warms my heart knowing that he did go on to make that game that he wanted to make so badly. I strongly believe that the game he's talking about is Dragon Quest V, which went on to be his favorite Dragon Quest game if I remember correctly, and is many fans' favorite Dragon Quest game as well. Unfortunately, the same could not be said about Dragon Quest II. In an interview done in 1989 after they had finished creating Dragon Quest III, they had the following to say about Dragon Quest II. Nakamura said, Dragon Quest II ended up receiving favorable reviews from everyone, but from our perspective as the creators, we felt like we were only able to accomplish about half of what we wanted to do. We were just too busy. Every day I'd get updated instructions from Yuji Horii, and programming those occupied all my time. I couldn't do any debugging myself until right before we were supposed to take the final version in for production. I feel pretty good about Dragon Quest II, about up until you get the boat. After that, I don't like the game very much. The difficulty balance with the monsters, fell short of my aspirations. And Yuji Horii said, yeah, we just didn't have the time. In a way, this is kind of shocking, but in another way, not so much, because this is where most people fall off of Dragon Quest II. As soon as you get the ship, the whole game kind of falls apart, and later in this interview, they kind of explain why. Nakamura says, yeah, you yourself didn't even have time to play all the way through, to which Yuji Horii replied, I had to write the scenario and adjust the game balance at the same time, so I was very busy. I too played up until you get the boat many times, but there was absolutely no time for me to thoroughly play the latter half of the game. From the boat to Roan, the content is a bit thin. Nakamura then said, it wasn't just you and me either. On the day the final version was ready to be taken in for production, I was shocked to learn that not a single person on the development team had played the game all the way through. I was horrified. How are we supposed to release a game in this state? Thankfully for Dragon Quest III, we've resolved this problem. The game has been completely balanced and tested from start to finish. Yuji Horii then said, even I couldn't really tell how Dragon Quest II played from start to finish. But for Dragon Quest III, we were able to spend a lot of time fine-tuning many different sections. I really feel confident saying that Dragon Quest III is perfect. So there you have it. If you didn't enjoy Dragon Quest II after getting the ship, like many of us, the developers agree. They also didn't really enjoy the game after you got the ship and didn't have time to even test the game after that point. So it all makes sense as to why the game kind of falls apart after getting the ship. I hope you guys enjoyed the information from this interview as much as I did. It really kind of peels back the game and gives you a look at why Dragon Quest II turned out the way it did. They had so many challenges with this game, and then every time they'd try and fix it, they'd have to go back and fix everything else around it. So it totally makes sense why the game is as challenging and frustrating to play sometimes as it is, but a lot of us Dragon Quest fans just grew to love it anyways. Let me know, do you guys think this alternate ending is going to happen in Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake? Do you think the Prince of Canic is going to die in the final battle? And do you think the Princess of Canic is going to take it out on the rest of the party, even though she's going to be in the party this time? What do you guys think they're going to do with the sunken treasure part of the game? Do you think they're going to make it a lot more manageable? I hope they do more than just have that gold circle around it like they did in Dragon Quest III HD-2D Remake with all the orbs and objectives and stuff like that. I hope they do something to make it stand out in the sea. I hope they don't even put a marker on it. I want them to just give you a general idea, or put a marker but make it a giant circle so you have a good idea of the rough area that the sunken treasure is going to be in. Anyways, let me know down in the comments your thoughts on this interview. Let me know down in the comments if you think or want any of these features discussed in this interview in Dragon Quest II HD-2D Remake. And if you enjoyed this, please remember to like, subscribe, and turn notifications to all so you don't miss the next video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.